On November 21, 1920, Dublin awakened to what seemed like an ordinary Sunday. By nightfall, the city would witness one of the most pivotal days in Ireland's fight for independence, a day that would become known as Bloody Sunday. In the shadows of Dublin's Georgian buildings, Michael Collins, the architect of the Irish Republican Army's intelligence network, had set in motion an unprecedented operation, his target, the core of British intelligence operations in Ireland. The audacious plan would not only demonstrate the IRA's growing capabilities, but also provoke a response that would forever change the nature of the Anglo-Irish conflict. This is the story of how a single day of calculated violence and tragic retaliation reshaped the Irish War of Independence. From the morning's precision strikes against British intelligence officers to the horrific afternoon massacre at Croke Park, Bloody Sunday emerged as a defining moment in Ireland's relentless pursuit of sovereignty. It stands as a testament to both the strategic brilliance of the independence movement and the devastating human cost of the struggle for freedom. By autumn 1920, Dublin had become the staging ground for a sophisticated intelligence war that would reshape the Irish struggle for independence. The British administration's elite unit, known as the Cairo Gang, had woven themselves into the fabric of Irish society with chilling efficiency. These weren't ordinary soldiers, but highly trained operatives who masqueraded as businessmen, journalists, and civilians. Living in boarding houses and hotels throughout Dublin's fashionable districts, they cultivated informants, monitored suspected Republicans, and meticulously gathered intelligence that led to the capture and execution of key IRA figures. The Cairo Gang's methods were as brutal as they were effective. They conducted midnight raids, interrogated family members, and maintained an extensive network of paid informants. Their intelligence operations had already led to the arrest of several high-ranking IRA officers, and their presence cast a shadow of fear over Dublin's nationalist communities. The gang's members were chosen for their cunning and ruthlessness. Many had served in military intelligence during the Great War, bringing their expertise in counterinsurgency to the streets of Dublin. Michael Collins understood that conventional warfare couldn't defeat the British Empire. Instead, he crafted a counterintelligence network that would become legendary in the annals of guerrilla warfare. At its heart was the Squad, a specialized unit of IRA operatives chosen for their nerve and discretion. Known to their comrades as the 12 Apostles, though their numbers would fluctuate, these men combined the skills of soldiers with the cunning of spies. Collins transformed ordinary citizens into his eyes and ears. Maids noted their employers' unusual visitors. Postal workers tracked suspicious correspondence, and shopkeepers observed the comings and goings of British agents. Collins's network operated with remarkable sophistication. He established a system of dead drops throughout the city, using seemingly innocent locations, bookshops, tobacco stores, and pubs, to pass crucial intelligence. His operatives developed methods to identify and track British agents, from monitoring their drinking habits to tracking their laundry marks. Every scrap of information, no matter how trivial, was carefully cataloged and cross-referenced. The British response to the growing IRA threat came in the form of the Black and Tans and Auxiliary Division, paramilitary forces notorious for their brutal tactics. Recruited from former soldiers, many traumatized by their experiences in the Great War, these forces brought military-style violence to Ireland's civilian population. Their campaign of terror included arbitrary arrests, property destruction, and public humiliation of civilians. They conducted reprisal raids on villages and towns, burning homes and businesses suspected of supporting the IRA. Yet each raid and reprisal only strengthened Irish resolve, swelling the ranks of Collins' intelligence network with newly radicalized supporters. Through October and early November 1920, the tension in Dublin reached a fever pitch. Collins' network systematically built detailed files on the Cairo Gang, employing a web of informants that stretched from the city's grandest hotels to its humblest boarding houses. They mapped daily routines, identified safe houses, and noted vulnerabilities. Maids working in boarding houses provided detailed information about their residents' habits. Barbers, taxi drivers, and newspaper vendors all became unwitting sources of intelligence. The information painted a clear picture. The British agents were most exposed on Sunday mornings when their guards were lowest and their routines most predictable. Collins began planning an operation of unprecedented scale, simultaneous strikes across Dublin that would cripple British intelligence in a single morning. The planning was meticulous. Each potential target was photographed, their daily movements tracked and timed. Safe houses were established throughout the city, and escape routes were carefully plotted. Collins knew that the operation would provoke a furious response from the British authorities, but he believed that removing the Cairo Gang was worth the risk. The operation required absolute secrecy. Only a handful of senior IRA officers knew the full scope of the plan. Information was compartmentalized. Each unit received only the details necessary for their specific target. Collins implemented strict security measures, knowing that even a single leak could doom the entire operation. He personally vetted each member of the assassination teams, choosing men known for their steadiness under pressure and absolute discretion. As November 21st approached, Collins' men received their assignments. Each team memorized photographs, addresses, and escape routes. They conducted careful reconnaissance of their target locations, noting entrance and exit points, typical police patrol patterns, and potential escape routes. Weapons were cleaned and tested, ammunition distributed, and timepieces synchronized. They understood the gravity of their mission. Success could deal a decisive blow to British intelligence operations, while failure would expose the IRA's most valuable operatives and potentially destroy the independence movement. The night before the operation, Collins met with his key lieutenants in a safe house on Gardner Street. The final details were reviewed, contingency plans confirmed, and last-minute intelligence updates shared. As his men dispersed into the darkness, Collins knew they were about to execute one of the most daring operations in irregular warfare history. The stage was set for a day that would forever change the course of Ireland's fight for independence. Dawn broke over Dublin on November 21st, 1920, with a heavy mist clinging to the city's Georgian facades. The streets were quiet, as they always were on Sunday mornings. But today that silence masked an operation unprecedented in both its scope and audacity. Across the city, IRA operatives moved into position, their weapons concealed under heavy winter coats. Each team focused on their assigned targets. The first rays of sunlight had barely touched the upper windows of 28 Upper Pembroke Street when the operation began. This elegant townhouse, home to two of British intelligence's most effective officers, was about to become the opening scene of a coordinated assault. At precisely 9 a.m., an IRA unit led by Mick O'Hanlon approached the front door. Their knock was answered by the landlady, who was quickly but quietly detained. The team moved swiftly up the stairs, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpeting. The operation at Pembroke Street set the pattern that would be repeated across Dublin. The British officers, caught completely off guard in their beds, had no time to reach for their weapons. Within minutes, both men lay dead, and the IRA unit was already moving toward their evacuation point, leaving behind a scene that would shock the British administration to its core. At the Gresham Hotel on Upper Sackville Street, another drama was unfolding. This prestigious establishment, with its polished brass fixtures and uniformed doormen, had become an unwitting sanctuary for several key intelligence officers. The IRA team, dressed in civilian clothes and moving with practiced casualness, made their way through the lobby. They had memorized their targets' room numbers and typical morning routines. The operation here was particularly delicate. The hotel was full of civilian guests, and any crossfire could result in innocent casualties. The team split into smaller units, each heading for different floors. At room 304, they found their primary target, Captain Patrick McCormick, one of the Cairo Gang's most effective operators. The shooting was swift and decisive. Similar scenes played out in rooms 202 and 424. Within minutes, the teams were calmly walking out of the hotel, leaving behind chaos and confusion that would take hours to unravel. Not every operation went according to plan. On Bagot Street, an IRA unit encountered unexpected resistance. Their target, unlike the others, was awake and armed. The ensuing gunfight shattered the Sunday morning quiet, sending pedestrians scrambling for cover. The operation succeeded, but at a cost. 2 IRA members were wounded, and the noise had alerted nearby British patrols. In Mount Street, another team found their target's residence empty. Intelligence later revealed he had been called away unexpectedly the previous evening. This stroke of luck would haunt the IRA in the coming weeks, as the survivor would become instrumental in British reprisals. The most dramatic confrontation occurred at 119 Lower Bagot Street, where 2 British officers put up fierce resistance. The gunfight spilled out onto the street, with both sides exchanging fire from behind parked motor cars and doorways. The IRA team eventually prevailed, but the extended engagement had drawn unwanted attention. As police whistles began to shrill in the distance, the unit was forced to take a longer, more circuitous escape route. By 10:30 a.m., the operations were complete. The final tally was devastating for British intelligence. 14 officers dead, 6 wounded, and their carefully constructed intelligence network in shambles. The surviving officers, shocked by the precision of the attacks, were forced to abandon their lodgings, destroying crucial intelligence files in their haste to find secure accommodations. The IRA teams melted away into the city using their pre-planned escape routes. They moved in ones and twos, their weapons disassembled and hidden in everyday items, newspaper parcels, violin cases, and toolboxes. Many took refuge in safe houses throughout the city, while others calmly went about their Sunday routines, indistinguishable from ordinary citizens. Collins received the reports at a safe house in Gardner Place. The operation had achieved its primary objective. The Cairo Gang had been effectively dismantled. But he knew that the British response would be swift and terrible. Even as his men were making their escapes, British military vehicles were already beginning to move through the streets of Dublin, and the first reports of the morning's events were reaching Dublin Castle. The success of the morning operations demonstrated the sophistication of Collins' intelligence network and the discipline of his operatives. But it had also crossed a line from which there could be no return. The British administration, humiliated by the coordinated assassinations of their intelligence officers, would soon unleash a response that would transform this surgical strike into one of the bloodiest days in the Irish struggle for independence. As Dublin reeled from the morning's assassinations, thousands of people made their way to Croke Park for what should have been a highlight of the sporting calendar. A challenge match between the Tipperary and Dublin football teams. The event had been widely advertised, and by early afternoon, nearly 10,000 spectators had gathered at the grounds. Among them were families with children, young couples, and workers enjoying their day off, all seeking a brief escape from the tension that had gripped their city. The scene at Croke Park that afternoon painted a deceptively normal picture. Vendors moved through the crowd selling sweets and cigarettes. Children perched on their fathers' shoulders for a better view of the field. The Tipperary team, resplendent in their blue and gold jerseys, had traveled up from the south despite the increasing military activity on the roads. Their captain, Michael Hogan, led them through their warm-ups as the Dublin team, in their sky blue colors, did the same at the opposite end of the field. Unknown to the spectators, British authorities had received intelligence suggesting that IRA members involved in the morning's operations might be among the crowd. Rather than attempting to infiltrate plainclothes officers to identify suspects, the decision was made to surround the grounds and conduct a mass search. Major Mills, the officer in charge, would later claim he had intended only to stop and search the departing spectators. What followed instead would shock the conscience of a nation. At 3:25 p.m., precisely 10 minutes after the match had begun, British forces arrived at Croke Park in a convoy of military vehicles. Their composition was significant. It included regular Royal Irish Constabulary officers, but also members of the Auxiliary Division and the notorious Black and Tans. These forces took up positions around the ground's perimeter with military precision. The first indication of trouble came when an airplane swooped low over the field, an unusual sight that drew concerned murmurs from the crowd. What happened next remains disputed in official accounts, but is devastatingly clear in witness testimonies. Without warning or proclamation, shots rang out. Some witnesses reported seeing an officer fire a red flare, possibly intended as a signal, but before the flare had even expired, machine gun fire erupted from the canal end of the ground. Rifles began firing from other positions, creating a deadly crossfire over the packed stadium. The scene immediately descended into chaos. The initial shots sent the crowd into panic, with thousands of people trying to flee in every direction. The partnership between Tipperary and Dublin players, competitors moments before, transformed into a desperate collaboration to help spectators. Players used their own bodies to shield children, directing people toward what they hoped were safer exits. Michael Hogan, the Tipperary captain, was shot in the back while trying to crawl to safety on the field. The statistics of casualties, while shocking, failed to capture the full horror of what transpired. Jane Boyle, who had attended the match with her fiancé and was to be married the following week, was shot dead as she tried to escape. 10-year-old Jerome O'Leary, who had climbed a tree for a better view of the match, was killed by a bullet to the head. William Robinson, age 11, was shot while sitting in a tree near the canal end of the ground. Tom Hogan, no relation to the player, was mortally wounded and died later from his injuries. The shooting lasted only 15 minutes, but its impact would endure for generations. When the gunfire finally ceased, the field that had hosted a sporting event just moments before had become a scene of carnage. Abandoned possessions, hats, coats, shoes, lay scattered across the grass, many stained with blood. 14 civilians lay dead or dying, and more than 60 others were wounded. Among the dead were 3 schoolboys, a young woman about to be married, and Michael Hogan, whose name would later be given to the Hogan Stand at Croke Park. The aftermath was characterized by confusion and conflicting narratives. British authorities initially claimed their forces had been fired upon first, a claim that would be thoroughly discredited by witness testimonies and subsequent investigations. They also attempted to justify the action by suggesting that armed IRA members had been present in the crowd, though no weapons were ever found among the spectators. The behavior of British forces during and after the shooting further inflamed public outrage. Witnesses reported soldiers laughing and joking as they left the scene. Several soldiers were seen rifling through the pockets of the dead and wounded. When ambulances arrived to treat the injured, they were initially prevented from entering the grounds. Many of the wounded, fearing arrest, fled without seeking medical attention, leading to complications that would affect them for the rest of their lives. The massacre at Croke Park represented more than just the tragic loss of 14 innocent lives. It marked a fundamental shift in how many Irish people viewed the conflict. What had been a political and military struggle became, for many, a visceral demonstration of the brutality of occupation. The killing of unarmed civilians attending a sporting event, including women and children, crystallized opposition to British rule in a way that previous violence had not. The events at Croke Park also garnered international attention in a way that other incidents had not. Newspaper correspondents from around the world filed reports that painted a damning picture of British actions. The shooting of civilians at a sporting event proved particularly shocking to international audiences, and comparisons were drawn to colonial atrocities in India and elsewhere in the empire. The British administration's attempts to justify the killings only served to further damage their credibility. The sun set on November 21, 1920, over a Dublin forever changed. The day's events, from the dawn assassinations to the afternoon massacre, had transformed the Irish War of Independence from a guerrilla conflict into something far more personal for thousands of Irish citizens. The British administration's hopes that a show of force would quell the independence movement had backfired catastrophically, instead galvanizing support for the Republican cause across all segments of Irish society. The immediate aftermath brought more violence. That evening, 2 high-ranking IRA prisoners, Dick McKee and Peter Clancy, along with civilian Conor Clune, were tortured and shot dead in Dublin Castle. British authorities claimed they had been killed while trying to escape, but their bodies showed clear signs of brutal treatment. These killings, following the Croke Park massacre, reinforced the perception that British forces were engaged in indiscriminate reprisals rather than legitimate military operations. For Michael Collins, the day represented both triumph and tragedy. The morning operations had achieved their primary objective, the destruction of British intelligence networks in Dublin. The Cairo Gang, which had posed an existential threat to the IRA's operations, was effectively dismantled. Some of Britain's most experienced intelligence officers had been eliminated, and the survivors were forced to abandon their established networks and safe houses. This strategic victory, however, came at a terrible cost. The deaths at Croke Park would haunt Collins for the remainder of his life, though he maintained that the morning's operations were a necessary step toward Irish independence. The British government faced an immediate crisis of legitimacy. Prime Minister Lloyd George and his cabinet struggled to justify the actions of their forces, particularly at Croke Park. The official investigation, headed by Major General Boyd, attempted to maintain that the troops had been fired upon first, a claim thoroughly discredited by eyewitness accounts and subsequent historical research. The military inquiry's whitewashing of events only served to further erode British credibility, both in Ireland and internationally. The international response proved particularly damaging to British interests. American newspapers, already sympathetic to the Irish cause, provided extensive coverage of the Croke Park massacre. The New York Times ran detailed accounts of the civilian casualties, while the Chicago Tribune compared the events to colonial atrocities in India. This international attention strengthened the hand of Irish-American organizations lobbying for U.S. support of Irish independence. Donations to Irish relief funds increased significantly, and political pressure mounted on the British government to find a peaceful resolution. Within the British military and political establishment, Bloody Sunday forced a re-evaluation of strategy. The failure to protect their intelligence officers, combined with the public relations disaster of Croke Park, led many to question the effectiveness of military repression. Major General Henry Tudor, who had advocated for aggressive tactics against the IRA, found his position increasingly untenable. The events contributed to a growing realization among British leaders that a purely military solution to the Irish question was impossible. The impact on Irish society was profound and lasting. The deaths at Croke Park became powerful symbols of British oppression and Irish resilience. The victims were mourned as martyrs to the cause of independence, their stories passed down through generations. Michael Hogan's name was immortalized when the Hogan Stand was erected at Croke Park in 1924, making the stadium not just a sporting venue, but a place of national memory. Each victim's story became part of a larger narrative about the struggle for Irish freedom. In the months following Bloody Sunday, the pattern of the conflict shifted. The IRA's intelligence operations, while still effective, never again attempted such a coordinated mass assassination. British forces, stung by international criticism, moderated their use of reprisals, though violence continued on both sides. More significantly, the events of November 21st convinced many moderates that compromise with British rule was impossible, strengthening support for the Republican position in negotiations that would eventually lead to the Anglo-Irish Treaty. The day's legacy extended far beyond the immediate conflict. When the Irish Free State was established in 1922, many of the key figures involved in Bloody Sunday played important roles in the new state's security apparatus. The methods developed by Collins' intelligence network influenced Irish military and police operations for decades. The event also left an indelible mark on Anglo-Irish relations, with the memory of Croke Park remaining a powerful symbol of the costs of colonial rule. Modern Ireland continues to grapple with the legacy of Bloody Sunday. The day is commemorated annually, with ceremonies at Croke Park and other sites associated with the events. Historians have extensively documented both the morning assassinations and the afternoon massacre, though some details remain disputed. The release of military archives and witness statements has allowed for increasingly detailed analysis of the day's events, contributing to a more nuanced understanding of this pivotal moment in Irish history. The GAA, Gaelic Athletic Association, whose match was interrupted by the massacre, maintains a special relationship with the memory of Bloody Sunday. The organization has worked to preserve the stories of those who died, particularly through the GAA Museum at Croke Park. The Hogan Stand serves as a permanent reminder of the intersection of sport and national identity in Irish culture. Perhaps most significantly, Bloody Sunday demonstrated the futility of using military force alone to suppress a population's desire for self-determination. The British response to the morning's assassinations, rather than crushing the independence movement, provided compelling evidence of why that movement was necessary. The day's events accelerated the process that would eventually lead to Irish independence, though the path to that goal would remain bloody and controversial. Today, Croke Park stands as both a modern sporting arena and a monument to those who died in 1920. The stadium hosted a historic rugby match between Ireland and England in 2007, marking a new chapter in Anglo-Irish relations. Yet the memory of Bloody Sunday remains, not as an open wound, but as a solemn reminder of the cost of freedom and the importance of pursuing justice through peaceful means. The day's final legacy may be its role in shaping Ireland's approach to conflict resolution in the modern era. The lessons of Bloody Sunday, about the spiral of violence, the importance of international opinion, and the ultimate futility of military solutions to political problems, have influenced Irish foreign policy and its approach to peace-building, particularly during the Northern Ireland peace process. In this way, the tragic events of November 21st, 1920, continue to inform Ireland's journey toward a peaceful and prosperous future.